So we're back with Scott Hallenbeck, the CEO and Executive Director of USA Football, and one of the real key people to getting flag football established as an Olympic sport, both for men and women. We are now, 5 years away, I guess, Scott, in 2028. So, Scott, I'll lead off with that. I'm not the biggest flag football advocate. I think it's a great game. I'm happy that so many people are doing it. I've learned a lot about especially girls playing flag now and how much they love it. And, I had a long talk with Rich McKay of the Atlanta Falcons in training camp this year. And he talked a lot about all the schools in Georgia that are playing and the fact that the three levels of championship in that state tournament, they were all going to have their championship game at their stadium, Mercedes-Benz Stadium, and how excited they were about that. So, Scott, I guess I'll start by saying, what do you think was the key to making this, to getting it over the goal line and making it an Olympic sport?
Well, so first of all, as you probably know, every sport has an international federation. So the most obvious would be FIFA for soccer or FIBA for basketball, et cetera. And ours is what we call IFAF, International Federation of American Football, some 70 members around the world. We do tackle and flag. We have women's tackle world championships, men's tackle world championships. We have men's and women's flag world championships. So frankly, we were focused on both in our discussions with the International Olympic Committee for years and years and years. It really was around the 2018-2019 period where we started to, ask some very direct questions. And does the IOC believe that tackle has a real chance in the Olympics? And long story short, it came down mostly to the challenges around their 10,500 athlete cap. And so the idea of 45 athletes on the men's side, 45 athletes on the women's side, times at least 8 countries became just untenable in terms of the potential impact. So again, like you've seen with rugby, they're traditionally 15s. They had to go to 7s to get in the Olympics. You've probably seen with lacrosse, traditionally 10s are going to go with 6s. So long story short is we realized that the better option, the viable option was flag. And so we asked the simple question. There was interest in that. We then started having conversations with the likes of the NFL and a bunch of other stakeholders. And long story short is that had traction. So, and then you already mentioned it, when the floodgates opened, and actually great to hear about Rich McKay and the Falcons. I mean, they were true leaders in this. And really the NFL clubs have been, really since that time, leaders to push now 8 states that have girls flag as a varsity sport. I just never seen in all my years working in sport and, a multitude of different sports, even working for the Olympic Committee. I've never seen a sport or a discipline of a sport scale as fast as this on the girls' side. So there was any number of stakeholders, any number of discussions that happened, but in the end, it was you have a real chance with flag, not as likely with tackle. And so an international federation's primary function, again, as you probably know, is to be in the Olympics. You want to be at the highest level, and that was our best chance in football. And the stars started to align, over a number of years.
How big of a deal is it that the Olympics are in LA, and if they were in, pick a country, Moscow, Beijing, or pick a city, Moscow, Beijing, Sydney, whatever, how much did having the games in the United States push this?
No question, absolutely paramount that the opportunity to start football in the Olympics likely wouldn't happen if it wasn't in the US and probably particularly LA. Again, you probably know this, but I'll use Japan and Tokyo as an example in 2020. So the IOC purposely set a strategy in motion years and years ago where they invite the country and the local organizing committee to identify the invitational or demonstration sports that they would like to see added to the program. And it's exactly what you probably would expect. They want there to be, more ticket sales, more people in stadiums,
Right.
ultimately more eyeballs in broadcast. There clearly is a purpose behind it, but one that seems to really work well. So in Tokyo, they added baseball, an incredibly popular sport that wasn't in the Olympics at the time. So hence we had the opportunity, or LA 28 had the opportunity with the IOC to add, lacrosse, a very popular sport in the US. Obviously, flag football now, an incredibly fast-growing popular sport, et cetera, the rest. But that's really, so yes, you are exactly right. No question is that a critical piece to this overall success of getting flag in the games.
I'm curious, do you think that this is going to be permanent? How does the IOC examine this after, say, one Olympic Games and say we want to continue or we're not going to continue it? What has to happen for flag football to be a permanent Olympic sport?
So we're in the process of I'll use the term onboarding with the IOC as well as LA 28, as well as USA Football specifically with the US Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So we're working through that process. That said, and without knowing the exact details, my assumption and expectation is, again, probably what you'd expect. Does the sport have interest? Does it drive ticket sales? Is there fandom going on around the sport? Is it appealing on NBC and broadcast? How's the competition? Things that are critical to the IOC are competitive balance, inclusiveness. Eventually, we have to have adaptive. You don't have to have it as an invitational sport, but if it does stay on the program in the future, you'd have to add adaptive, and we can do that as well. So it's lack of a better term, business metrics and overall competitiveness are super important to this. To the extent, so I don't know what's going to happen there. I feel very confident that with certainly the support of the NFL clubs, et cetera, that we'll put on a really great show. I think because it's football, there'll also be a lot of interest, and certainly we'll probably talk about it. To the extent you can add an NFL player or two, that would only add that much more interest. And then the other thing I'd share real quickly is the quality of the women's side, the quality of the talent is really something to behold. We're talking what we refer to as in the Olympic movement as talent transfer. So truly elite, women's athletes. So Division I basketball players, soccer players, volleyball players, you name it. They are sort of coming out of the woodwork to play this game. I think it's just, probably the decades of growing up with dads and brothers and, boyfriends and what have you, and not necessarily having access to the game. And now all of a sudden the floodgates are open and they're coming in droves. So it's really cool to see. But ultimately, the fact the next games is in Brisbane, Australia, I think also gives us an opportunity. If it was in, any number of other places, we probably wouldn't have as much of a chance. So certainly the ball's in our court, so to speak, with putting on the best possible, I'll just call it performance overall, again, in both business and competitive metrics. And then ultimately hope that we can appeal to Australia, which I know the NFL is trying to grow there. I know there is interest in football, and flag is growing. And rugby is Australian rules rugby and other things are clearly more popular, but there's a chance.
I'll just tell you this. I think there will be an NFL game in Australia, a regular season game. I don't know what year. I'm thinking 27, 28, no later than 29. The interest is too great. And you've got teams, the Rams, for instance, the Philadelphia Eagles. I'll tell you, the Philadelphia Eagles would love to play a game there with Jordan Mailata before his career ends so that he could play in his home country or home area, So, but I wanted to ask you about... Well,
that would help. Clearly that would help if that happened.
Yeah. I wanted to ask you about how, at least in my mind, I've seen a lot of players in the NFL, Tyreek Hill for one. A lot of guys have said, man, count me in. I want to play. I want to go for an Olympic gold medal, which is fun, which is great. But part of me says, now, wait a second, Tyreek, you're going to be 34 years old. I mean, it might have to be the next Tyreek Hill, and nothing against Tyreek Hill, but his game is speed. Is he still going to be a dominant player in 5 years? Science, health, nature says maybe not. But I was thinking, just as you were talking about what really maybe not has to happen, but the best thing that could happen is to get, let's just say for the sake of argument, Patrick Mahomes to be the quarterback, or, a player or two who, and I don't even know that we can predict who it would be right now, Scott, because you're not going to pick it till at least 26 or 27, probably 27. And you just don't know who's going to be great then. That's 4 years down the road. But how important is it, and how will you attempt to get NFL players involved in this venture?
Well, first of all, again, the business side of this has to work itself out, like the NBA, right? The NFL and the NFL Players Association have to work it out in terms of the CBA. Then you probably have to address it with the owners. I mean, I would never speak for them. I know there's a lot of interest. I was having meetings at the last owners meeting, and there clearly was a lot of interest and discussion, to your point. But I think a lot of things have to get sorted out. That said, would it be exciting? Are there opportunities? Unequivocally, you're again 100% right. First of all, USA Football, like any other governing body, has to define the player selection process and get it approved by the U.S. Olympic and Paralympic Committee. It has to be transparent, fully published on our website and everywhere. Everyone knows exactly what that process is. In a perfect world, and we're not there yet, we would want to be at least a year, if not ideally 2, in advance. This is a different game. There's no question about it. For what it's worth, real quick, I saw an interview just recently with Steve Young talking about coaching his daughters. And of course, they would ask him about if you could coach and or play today, who would you want with you? And it really is about the Tyreek Hills that are that quick, dips and spins, things like that. You got to be incredibly accurate. Those guys have been certainly, and have the potential to be that kind of a quarterback, but it's a different game. My point being, it would take time. There's no way that even as talented as certainly NFL players are, that you could just sort of come over a month in advance and play. Again, the timing, it's right before the season would start, right? Or training camp would start. So there's any number of factors. All of that is simply to say there's a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of interest. Certainly former players, recently retired players would be a natural option. But I will also say there's some really talented, existing players today that naturally want to play and have, worked really hard to refine their skills and have proven themselves on the highest stage we have thus far, which are world championships or what they call the world games. This would be another level, and all 70 countries have to work to continue to improve the quality of our athlete pools. But the bottom line is NFL players, both domestically, but sort of to your point about these other countries, internationally would add a really exciting dimension to this. So as long as there's proper lead time, proper development, process, we call it high performance development, all of that would need to be in place. And the good news is these conversations are in fact happening. We're literally having these kinds of conversations with the NFL already about how could we make this work.
Scott, what also interests me is that I'm sure that the average person who just saw the news about flag football being an Olympic sport probably just assumes, well, let's chalk up the gold for the USA in both men's and women's. But I found this out over in Germany recently, going over for the NFL game. There's a lot of people in a lot of countries who are good at this game and who have devoted a lot of time to this game. So give me, let's say, give me three good challengers to the United States on both the men's and the women's side. Who's good out there right now?
Yeah, women's, no question. Mexico. I mean, they in the World Games, they beat the women's team for the gold medal. The Italian men.
They beat our women's team.
They beat our women's team. Yeah, absolutely. We came back and just beat them this past summer in the Continentals, and we have the World Championships next summer. But it is always super competitive, right down to the wire. Just two really talented teams and programs overall. And to your point, the feeder system and the future athletes there are only going to continue to get better. Panama is another one. Brazil is another one on the women's side.
How did Panama get good in women's football?
They literally draw these incredible, again, they had former Olympic volleyball players and soccer players on their team. They have to learn the sport. What would probably interest the followers is the fact that it two things. One, sort of the teams follow the culture. So often, Japan as an example, super disciplined, super well coached. Not always as big, but in this game, or at least in the tackle side and the flag side, super fast, quick, very accurate, just well coached. On the men's side, you'd say Canada, Austria, and Italy, and then Japan. Japan's in there. So, and then as we said, I mean, Australia and others are coming on fast. This was the other big difference. I mean, quite candidly, on the tackle side, the U.S. will sort of travel all over the world at these World Championships events, and we end up playing Canada. I mean, that's all, and or maybe Mexico. That was the top three all the time. This, we're already seeing not only dramatic increases in the number of countries and the number of teams on the men's and women's side that are attending our world championships, like more than doubling each time. The quality of the competition continues to improve. So certainly over the next 4 years. And the other thing that's super important here is now that it's been officially part of the 28 Olympics, the respective national Olympic committees will get behind these sports. In most cases, there'll be funding to support the development of the athletes and so forth. So there's just a lot of momentum and opportunity to continue to improve. So, will the U.S. have a real shot at gold? Of course, because number one, we're committed to it and we're going to work really hard at it. But number two, there's going to be serious competition. It's not a cakewalk by any stretch of the imagination.
Scott, people are going to be listening to this and say, how possibly, even 4 years from now, could teams in Italy and Austria and Australia, how could they compete with our teams? And I wonder, what has gotten football to be popular to the point that young kids in Italy or Austria or England are going out and throwing a football around? What has happened?
Well, I mean, in fairness, the football development and these countries have had federations now for, well, I've been involved almost 2 decades. So 2 to 3 decades at a minimum, number one. Number two, flag is, if you will, the soccer of development. It's super easy to develop the sport. We're talking about a 50-yard field, which is just, you could argue, just an open, space of grass, any field, 2 10-yard end zones by 25 yards wide. So it's a relatively small patch of grass, if you will, that you can play on. All you need is a football, like a soccer ball. And you could argue, you can play touch just to get started. You can add, socks to be flags. It's super inexpensive, super easy. You do have to teach quarterback play. That is probably the biggest challenge, frankly, is teaching that properly. And that's something that's already starting. We're having more and more people contact us, former collegiate quarterbacks and others saying, how can we help you grow this, particularly on the women's side? There's just a lot of excitement around that, but that's an opportunity. But the other one that I should mention, again, not unlike hockey or basketball, American athletes that have dual citizenship will go play. In fact, the quarterback for Italy was a Division II quarterback in our country that had dual citizenship. So you're allowed to obviously play for your other your other country. That will likely expand, especially with the likes of the NFL Academy program and a lot of universities now out recruiting international tackle football players that will absolutely want to play and represent their country. So the combination of the Olympics, the growing interest in international football players, mostly tackle, dual citizenship, sort of all of those are factors to see this grow. Granted, 4 years might sound like a lot to some people, doesn't sound like a lot at all to me, but you will see definite improvement in the quality of both men's and women's athletes.
I just have one last thing. When I think of being an employee of NBC and knowing how much they value the Olympics, when I think of NBC coming into a meeting with you, I think they're going to say, hey, listen, we want to get a great team out there, but let's try to convince Mahomes to play. I don't know that it would take a lot of arm twisting. I think he would love doing it. The question is, what are your chances of getting, and again, I understand that somebody who plays flag football all the time might be better right now than Patrick Mahomes is in flag football. I get that. I understand it. It's a little bit of a different game, but you almost have to get a big name either at quarterback or one of your prime receivers. So how do you view the likelihood of that happening?
Well, so there are a lot of steps that have to and things that have to fall in place for that opportunity to present itself. But again, we'd have to start with a very strict player selection process, which would more than welcome and be open to such players. They'd have to be willing to work with us in the offseason and really develop. But the fact of the matter is, my personal opinion, now I just give you that, is I would love to see what I'll call a blended team. I just think it would be great in so many ways. I would also share that I share this all the time. Again, having both worked at the U.S. Olympic Committee, been around it, I'll age myself. I was involved actually with the Olympic Committee way back in '92 when the first ever true dream team happened in Barcelona. So I was there. I had appreciation for it. Learned how it was working. Anyway, point being, one of the things I think that NBC does so exceptionally well is, of course, tell the story about the truly elite, amazing athletes. But when they tell the stories about, the curling guy who's from Wisconsin, and you're like, I would never in a million years pay any attention to the curling guy from Wisconsin if it wasn't for NBC telling me who this person is. So I just personally feel like that is such a cool thing to have some, with respect, average Joe, average Jane that's coming up, it's, I don't know, a plumber, but they're this really good,
Scott, there's no doubt about that. That's the Ebersol legacy. But I will say this. To get ratings, you got to get them Mahomes. That's all fair. I'm saying.
That's fair. I get it.
And who knows?
You're not the first to suggest that, but I hear you loud and clear.
Scott Hallenbeck, CEO, Executive Director of USA Football. I really appreciate you joining me on the podcast, and I'm glad you educated me a little bit. I've been a little bit of a negative guy not negative guy on flag football, but a negative guy on flag football in the Olympics. And now I'm starting to think this might be a good competitive sport in LA 5 years from now.
I believe you. I believe it will be, but I appreciate it. And thanks a lot for having me on.
Hi, I'm Mike Tirico, and thanks for watching. Make sure to hit subscribe for the latest news and highlights from NBC Sports.